Okay.
So let's start. Okay, let's being recorded. The session is being recorded now. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to the third session of the RPA, the new RPA. And Michelle is nice enough to train us on this. This is the third session, and so with that, I would like to ask Michelle to take over and train you on this new RPA.
Okay.
Michelle, go take it away.
Okay, so we're going to start. This is session 3 of the 4-part series. So as if any of you missed the first 2, as we said, put your email in the chat box and we'll get a link over to you for those other 2 series that went on. Now remember, this is a more condensed version of what CAR offers. Theirs is a solid 4 hours. We're hitting high points and items that we think that you, the pictures. Hang on, we're getting a little bit of housekeeping done on the computer. One moment, please. Okay, so again, this is a more condensed version, but we're hitting the points of the contract where we've seen issues in deals or just things that you may have questions on. So without any further, let's get going. So we're going to start on paragraph 14. Now this is going to look pretty familiar to the other paragraph in the previous contract: time periods, removal of contingencies, cancellation rights. So remember that any change to the contract, alterations, modifications, anything, extensions, everything needs to be done in writing, as we all know, and that's just a little reminder here up at the top. So 14A, the seller delivery of documents. The seller, by default of the contract, unless you've modified that time frame, has 7 days after acceptance to deliver all documents. That is including, and I'm probably harping too much on this, but your HOA documents, make sure you're ordering early on those. We have 7 days to get everything over to the buyer so that they have ample time to review the documents. So the buyer is going to review all the documents that you've sent them. And we're going to drop right here. It's saying that buyer may, within the specified time, meaning the contingency periods. The default on this contract, as you remember from the grid, is 17 days unless you have amended those via modification of the contract or counteroffers. So the buyer can go ahead and ask that the seller make repairs. They can request repairs. Remember, this is this is an as-is contract, but the buyer can ask for repairs, and they're going to ask through a request for repair. Now, right here, it says that the seller has no obligation to agree or even to respond to the buyer's request. But if they do respond to the buyer, which usually we all respond because the buyer wants to know, so they know what their next step would be. So it's probably advisable to respond, but again, that's up to you as an agent. So the seller would respond on an RRRR. So if the seller does not agree to the buyer's request, at that point, the buyer has, they can, based on that contingency, their inspection contingency, they can cancel the agreement. The buyer is not contractually entitled to have repairs made. Most of us try to cooperate with each other, but that's just really good for you to know and you to know where it's at. Okay. So we're going to look right here on number 3. This one is if you deliver, let's say a buyer has already removed their contingencies, but then you deliver a report that pertained to one of those contingencies that had already been waived or removed. The delivery of your report, listing agent, that you're delivering late does not revive the contingency, but there may be a right to terminate, due to what they find in that document. So if you deliver it late and they don't like what's in the document, they're most likely going to have a right to terminate, even if that contingency has been removed. So you want to make sure that you're getting everything out. Sometimes it's beyond your control, I understand, but just remember, it's going to give them 5 more days after receipt to investigate that document. So continuation of a contingency. Remember, in this contract, we have active contingency removal requirements. So that means if you had 17 days and as a listing agent, the buyer has not removed, you just tooling along, you get to day 25 and still nothing. Those contingencies are in full effect. So our sellers are counting on us to advise them, keep track of the timelines, and make sure that you're sending out that request for contingency removal. It's our job to make sure we're watching that. Our sellers and our buyers are counting on us to do that. So just remember, nothing is an automatic removal in this contract for contingencies. You need to do it actively with the form, contingency removal form to be exact. So seller right to cancel buyer contingencies. Before canceling the agreement, the seller needs to send a notice to perform, when we're all familiar with that. So you send it 2 days ahead of the performance date to the buyer. So make sure that you're not sending it early, because that could mean that the document is not valid. So make sure you're sending it at the right moment, on time. You can send it 2 days in advance. Okay, so let's come down to here. Seller may cancel this agreement by good faith exercise of any seller contingency included in this agreement or otherwise agreed. So what that means is maybe the seller had a contingency to find a replacement property, something of that nature, and they couldn't find it. So they also have rights to cancel under the form COP. So if they have that type of contingency, make sure that you're watching those contingency lines as well. So we're going to go into a little more depth, because there's some new language on the notice to buyer or seller to perform. So if you look here, you may not deliver the notice to perform 2 days prior, any earlier than 2 days prior to the scheduled performance day. So let's scheduled performance day. So what does that mean? The scheduled performance day, let's say your 17th day or 10th day or whatever is in your contract fell on a Saturday. That is your scheduled performance day. Now, you can deliver it 2 days in advance to have them remove the contingencies, but the allowable performance day, keep this in mind, is going to fall to the next Monday. So you cannot have the performance day versus allowable day. You cannot remove the contingency until an allowable day. So what is an allowable day? It's any day other than a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. But you can go ahead, use your performance day 2 days in advance. You can schedule and send that notice to perform, buyer or seller. And remember, if you don't do it properly or the delivery is not correct, it says right here that it's deemed invalid and void. So make sure, this is new language right here, scheduled performance day, if that falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or a legal holiday, the allowable performance day moves to the next day that they can perform on, which would be a Monday or Tuesday or whatever the holiday or weekend is. Okay, so that's new. Go ahead.
Excuse me, Oscar, could you do a full screen?
Oh, it's not full screen?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. Sure. Thank you for letting me know.
No problem. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. Don't worry.
Oscar.
Thank you.
Our side is showing we're on a full screen. Can everybody see?
Peter.
Okay. So,
Yes, I can see it.
okay.
Oscar. So yeah, I can see the full screen. So what happened, Oscar?
Maybe
Can
it's
you-
on my side.
Can you
then.
see?
No, mine is still small.
Oh,
Small?
okay.
Are you using a full screen and your
Oh,
computer?
you need to click, Michelle, click on full screen on the top left right there. So the contract is bigger for everybody to see. Next to record. Yes, right there.
Okay.
There we
Oh,
go.
there you go.
Okay. So let me now go
That's
back
good.
down to where I
Yes,
was.
thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. No problem. Sorry for the scrolling. I hope I'm not making anybody sick. Dizzy. Okay, so we're going to talk about the effect and removal of contingencies. So agents, it's very important to understand removing the contingencies. Make sure your buyer has performed all of the inspections that they deem necessary. And if they felt like they needed to go to the city, make sure they've already done that within the inspection periods, because once you remove the contingencies, that means that the buyer is agreeing to proceed on this deal. So I always call it in my head locked and loaded, because that means, you know, there's no return. We're ready to go. So make sure when you're removing the contingencies that your buyer fully understands what's going on and that they fully agree to proceed on this transaction, because you don't want to have a problem later where it may involve, you know, their deposit. So demand to close escrow. Before a buyer or seller can cancel this agreement, to the other party must first deliver a demand to close escrow. It's a CAR form DCE, and that form must be delivered to the other party within 3 days prior to the performance date, the scheduled performance day. So make sure if you're going to demand to close escrow that you deliver properly the DCE form in the specified time frame. You don't want to deem it right here invalid or void. So make sure you do that properly and in the right time frame. Now, when you deliver the demand to close, sellers agents, if any escrow, contingencies are left open, you're not entitled to the deposit because that buyer still has a contingency. So make sure that if you're demanding to close, you know, you've already went through all of the contingency removal before you do this, or if you still need to do it, just do it and cancel, but they may not be entitled to that deposit, okay? So it's important to be watching all of your contingency lines on that. And if you look at the, when I was looking through the forms, if you look at the contingency removal forms, the buyer contingency removal forms, there is a great section in there that tells you everything that needs to be removed. So I think it's a good idea to print that out. You can write in the timelines of that, of when it needs to be removed. And you'll find that also on the notice for buyer to perform. So there's a nice list there that will also tell you exactly what needs to be removed. Now, if the buyer or seller cancels in good faith this agreement, they want to remind you that a party cannot just sit and hold and not cancel or sign if there's no good faith dispute on this. So there is a civil code that says there's up to $1,000 fine for refusal to sign if no good faith dispute exists. Okay, so on the repairs, you want to make sure that prior to the final verification of condition walkthrough, that these are completed. We just had an agent that showed up at their final walkthrough and the repairs were not done. And so just a cautionary tale here, make sure that if you're having repairs done or they're agreed to, that you make sure they're done. You go to the property, get receipts. The seller needs to turn over receipts. If they're making repairs or they're having a third party make them, they need to provide you with those receipts. If the seller's making a repair, they can provide you with the receipts of the material they purchased, okay? So make sure you're obtaining those. Make sure well before your final walkthrough that you're verifying that that work has been done. Now, it's a lot safer in the deal if you have the seller provide some funds for the repairs rather than making them, because you'll note right here that the repairs shall be performed. This is nothing new, in good, skillful manner. But the buyer is also acknowledging in this paragraph that the restoration of the appearance for cosmetic things may not be exactly the same. They'll do their best, but they may not be the same. So just make sure that you understand that. Sometimes what somebody thinks is a good job or matches, other people may think it doesn't. So sometimes we really recommend, if there's a possibility of providing a credit for those items that you would need to match, that it might be easier to provide the credit and let the buyer make sure that they are having the repairs done the way that they want to. So coming down here to the VP form, final verification of condition. This is something we talked about, I think, in the first and second training. This is not a contingency of the sale, but you need to make sure that is the buyer on contract that is with you at the final walkthrough, not their uncle, not their mother. If that happens, on the VP form, there's a checkbox that says that the buyer waives this requirement. So make sure it is the buyer on contract that is making sure that they are there at the walkthrough. Otherwise, check the box, have all parties sign that they're waiving that verification of condition. So on paragraph 17, prorations of property taxes and other items, this is generally, this is a function performed in all cases, I think, by escrow. So we don't really get involved too much in this. Escrow will prorate any HOA fees or taxes, things of that nature. But here in bold, they're saying tax bills and utility bills issued after close of escrow shall be handled directly between buyer or seller. And it's reminding us that the prorations are made on a 30-day month period, even if it's a 31-day month. So we always use a 30-day month. So a lot of times after close, you'll be getting tax bills. If I get them, I do forward them to the other agent, but it says right here that that's directly to be handled between the buyer and seller. So just make sure that if you get them, as a courtesy, make sure that you are letting the other person know. Okay, so I'm hitting the high points of things here. So here again, this is FERPTA information right here, the seller's FERPTA obligation. So again, you can have escrow sign a qualified substitute statement that will comply with this law. The reason that this is provided instead of the FERPTA form is because it does not require the Social Security to be on it. So this is very important. We always, I would say in 95% of the deals, you're going to be having escrow sign a qualified substitute rather than providing, any FERPTA form, because you don't want to expose somebody's Social Security number. So I like this paragraph here. And again, most of the other paragraphs are going to all be the same, but selection of the service providers, I think this is very handy, and I think it's helpful to all of us. The agents do not guarantee the performance of any vendors, service, or product providers, whether referred by the agent or selected by the buyer, seller, or other person. So the buyer and seller here, they're telling them they can select any provider of their choosing. So that's just a nice paragraph to be aware of, that even if we refer, we can't, you know, I'm sure we've all had that experience where we referred somebody and then the performance was less than desirable to the person that we referred them to. So MLS listing service, all of our listings will be reported and uploaded into the MLS. So the buyer acknowledges that any pictures, floor plans, video, or other information about the property that is inputted in the MLS, it flows to the internet, as we know. It will not be removed after close of escrow. So Civil Code requires that the MLS maintain such images and information for at least 3 years. As a result, they may be continually displayed or circulated on the internet. We as agents or even the seller cannot control this. So we've all received those kind of phone calls where somebody wants the information or the pictures off of the internet of the house. We have no obligation or even in the ability to control Zillow or Redfin or any of those that have those images posted. So this is something to really be aware of and make sure that you're explaining it to your clients, both on the listing side and the buyer side, that those images can stay up for at least 3 years and we don't have any control of it. I guess if we were, the only control we may have is our own private Coldwell Banker George Realty website, but we don't have control of the other websites where this would flow to. So make sure you understand that and make sure that your clients understand, because I did just get a message last week about get me off of the internet on a closed deal, and there's really nothing that I or any other agent can do about that. So let's address attorney fees and costs. So remember that in any action, proceeding, or arbitration between the buyer and seller arising out of this agreement, the prevailing buyer or seller shall be entitled to reasonable attorney fees and costs from the non-prevailing buyer, except as provided in 30A. 30A is referencing the mediation paragraph, which we will get to in the next training session. So the prevailing party is responsible for any reasonable attorney fees. Now, assignment, remember this contract added a really nice section. They added that it's 17 days after acceptance, the buyer shall disclose to the seller their assignee. Now, the seller would need to approve that unless it is the buyer's own trust or an entity that was already in operation or created by acceptance at the time of acceptance. And the seller should not withhold their approval for an unreasonable amount of time or being unreasonable. So this is really nice. Remember, the assignees have to be identified within 17 days. That is the fallout, the default on the new contract. I think that's a great addition because now we won't be getting those last minute hustles on a new assignee. And also make sure if it's not the trust or the same entity, if this is a completely new assignee, agents to protect everybody, please make sure that that assignee is signing and initialing all of the documents, all of the disclosures, escrow instructions, the contract. Make sure that you're creating a package for the new assignee to initial all the documents. This will be a great help to you if anything transpired on that deal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a couple of forms because this training isn't as long. It's 3 pages and a lot of it was the same, but I want to show a couple of forms here that I think are very nice. So here we go. So if you look at this notice to buyer perform, agents, you can print this out, even a listing agent. this is all the contingencies that the buyer has in place. Some of them are not going to be applicable, like the COP, you know, the replacement property purchase, but you can literally print this form out for yourself. You can put red dates by it, whatever helps you to keep track as a listing agent or even a buyer's agent. Print this form out, help yourself out. This shows all of the contingencies that the buyer would need to be removing. If applicable, some of them like the COP will not be applicable, but this is a great form for you to use to keep track of the contingencies that you need to remove. So I'm going to also show the seller. This contract is more heavy on the buyer contingencies, but also here's the contingencies that the contractual actions and obligations and contingencies that the seller has. So you can print both of these forms out. You'll never question which contingencies or what contingencies because you have this form in front of you. These are very handy to keep. As I was reviewing them, I think that I'll staple this at the front of my files and make sure that I'm watching all those contingency lines. So those are helpful. Now I want to show you the cancellation of contract and release of deposit because there's two sections to this. So I'm hoping that none of us get into this cancellation, but sometimes, you know, it does happen. So there's two parts here on the cancellation. So this part can be one party or both parties. This is a request to cancel the contract and by mutual agreement, and they have to specify in good faith what paragraph they're canceling and why. So you check one of these boxes, one party or both parties can sign it. So that's the cancellation and release of deposit and cancellation of escrow. So this is just the cancellation of contract section. You come down to the section 2, release of deposit and cancellation. So remember, escrow cannot release any funds unless both parties are mutually agree. It takes both parties to get the funds released. It says right here, the release of the funds are not automatic. So there's 3 steps here or 3 different actions that you can check. So number 1, the seller authorizes the release of the buyer's deposit to the buyer, less any costs that they've incurred, and there may be an escrow cancellation fee. So that's one option. The second option is the buyer authorizes release of the deposit to seller, less any seller fees and costs already occurred. Okay, so they're saying if the seller has any fees and costs, the buyer authorizes the release. This is voluntary of the deposit to the seller. Now, why would the buyer do that? Maybe they removed all their contingencies and they weren't able to obtain that loan even though they had removed the contingency. So again, it's very important to be talking to your lender, making sure that, you know, everything is ready to go. So this one is voluntary, that the buyer is authorizing the buyer's deposit to be released, less any fees or costs, directly to the seller. Or number 3, this is kind of like splitting it or a portion of it. So the buyer authorizes, oh, maybe they're only going to authorize $10,000 buyer's deposit to the seller. So there's 3 options here for releasing of the deposit. So any of these 3 that pertain to your deal, you can check. Remember, number 2 is voluntarily the buyer is releasing their deposit to the seller. So D is a partial release and reservation of rights. So the seller and buyer are canceling the escrow and they mutually agree to this cancellation. However, they can't decide what to do with the deposit. So you see right here that they reserve the rights and retain any obligations they have towards each other under the agreement, except the obligation as applicable to buy, sell, or exchange the property. So this section here is that the buyer and seller cannot agree on the deposit release or how that's going to be handled. So they will wait and hold the deposit until receiving subsequent mutual instructions, judicial decision, or arbitration award. So this holds the deposit in a trust. We all hope that we're never in that, at escrow's trust. So the buyer or seller has no further obligation to buy, sell, or exchange the property any further. So they're just trying to come to agreement on the deposit. So the seller is free to sell the property. Right here, it's just stating that there's still time to agree on the deposit, how that will be handled. So those forms, I think, are important to familiarize yourself with, especially. I like that, these notice to performs will handle and give you all of the contingencies that you should be watching for. Just make sure that you are watching. That is our responsibility. Our buyers and sellers so heavily rely on us for that service. And so I'm hoping that you can print those and review all the contingencies. So this session, because we only had the 3 pages, it was a little bit shorter. So I want to ask if any of you have any questions. Peter Cam is here to answer. I'm here. So if you have questions, please go ahead and ask them. And as we stated last week, we will have a separate training on any forms such as fire hardening and defensible airspace. We're going to train on the TDS, and we may do an AVID training. So we will be having separate training for some disclosures so that we're all on board on how to properly fill those out. So right now, does anybody have any questions on contingencies, cancellation of contracts, anything of that nature that we can answer? I'm going to unmute. You can unmute yourself. Any questions? Something's wrong. Can you see what's going on? I've lost them.
Michelle, can you read what's on the chat?
Yeah, I'm okay. Oh, you know what? It just went dead on me. I was like, where's people at? Okay. Okay. So the chat, let's look.
Because somebody's asking a question about the training.
Okay, so I see where people want to have the things emailed. Yeah, so, okay, so the training from now on will be handled at 10 o'clock, 10 a.m. And we'll have different training. Now, next week, we'll finish up the contract. And again, this is a shorter version of CAR's training. They have a very long one. So if you want to go into the longer one, CAR does have a nice training. It's about 4 hours long. For us, we're just trying to hit the high points and make sure that we discuss some things that we've seen in contracts. So does anybody have any questions? Because if not, then we will conclude. But I want to tell you, as I always say, I appreciate being here with you all today. And remember, at Coldwell Banker, you're never alone in your transaction. We're always here to help you. There's somebody here to answer your question. Peter Cam can take your calls. I can take your calls. I'm pretty good on residential, I do have some commercial experience, but anything that you need help with, our broker is here for you. If you have a question, I can get that question over to Peter. He can give you a call back. So we don't ever want you to feel alone.
Yeah, your answer is just a phone call away. We are always available for you. Okay, so don't be shy.
Yeah, and this is a shorter training, so I just want to thank you all. And because most of that's familiar to us. And if you have any questions on contingencies or when to remove them or how, or when to deliver your notices, just call us and we'll look over your contract with you. You can either scan it and email it or give us a quick call. We're always here for you. So are there any questions?
Again,
Thank
all
you.
the training sessions are recorded. So just if you need the link to it, just call Edgar or Michelle. We'll provide you with a link to the recorded sessions.
Okay, so I'm going to write down all of the people that want the links, and then we'll go ahead and conclude this meeting unless Peter has anything further.
No, I don't have anything further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week, and we'll wrap the contract up, and then we'll go into training on those individual forms, TDS, fire hardening, AVID. And so bring your questions on those, and thank you very much, and enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye,
Thank you, Michelle.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much.
This weekend. Thank you, Peter.
Bye-bye.
Bye.